Hello, everyone, and welcome to iGaming Next Weekly News Live. Connor, the chat is popping off already. It's going to be a great show.
Absolutely. Look at this. Bogdan, Caio, Carlos, Reveler Parlay. How are you, everybody? Welcome to the chat. Thanks for getting things off to a lively start. How are you doing, Jake?
Yeah, I'm not doing too bad, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Like Connor said, although Bogdan, I must say, there's no summer in Manchester this year. It's rained every single day in July, so I could do with some of that European heat, I think.
Yes. Luckily for me, I live in the tropical paradise of London, as you can see. The palm trees nicely illuminated out the front there. So unlucky for you, Jake. But as Morrissey used to inform us, yes, it's always raining in Manchester.
Yeah, I asked for this, didn't I, when I moved up north? Now, you may have noticed that Mr. Nico is not with us again this week for the second week in a row. And I don't know about you, Connor, but I think they're going to need to introduce a three strikes and out policy, personally.
Yeah, I think you've got to roll with the punches in this industry, Jake, though. And quite frankly, at least we'll be able to get a word in edgeways today. Nico not being present, but we will miss his dulcet tones, of course. Nobody can present the news quite like Nico can, but we look forward to having him back hopefully next week.
That's right. We need some of his infectious enthusiasm back on the pod, and obviously that means no 10 and 5. So I'm sorry if you were tuning in for that. Katie, I might as well at you as it's your your favourite feature by far. You may have noticed also there was an advert at the beginning of this for our New York show next year, and I would encourage you to pre-register for that because tickets go on sale in August. So don't miss out. It was a hell of a show last year, and we're planning to make it even bigger and better this year. Before we dive in, Connor, I want to say a quick thank you as well to our sponsors, Playson, Interactive, and Hub 88. Thanks a lot, guys. And this week, there's not really any deep dive on one topic or any special guest. We are kicking it old school, Connor, aren't we? By basically running around the headlines of the week, the biggest news stories.
We are, but there's a bit of a theme, if I may say. We've got a bit of a UK special this week, I would say. Our home market, a market very close to our hearts. There's been some pretty big headlines here in Britain this week. So lots to discuss. I believe if we're ready to dive into our first topic, starting with one of our biggest gambling firms, Entain, and their latest move. Jake, what have you for us?
I'll intro this one, shall I? I think Sonia wrote this one for us, but basically Entain has been flexing its M&A muscles again and has bought quite a sought-after business in Angstrom Sports, which is a kind of pricing and analytics trading firm that is all the rage right now because basically they can help Entain with their same-game parlays in the US, and as we know, that's where the money is. Before we go any further, Connor, I just want to shout out Business Insider because they reported this in was it May or March?
I think it was me.
Yeah, back in May. So a good few months ago now, and they even got the price pretty much bang on because they said 200 million. And I think this deal was agreed for an upfront payment of 81 million, along with contingent payments over the next 3 years of 122 million, and combined that's 204. So fair play. Their sources were definitely in the know in that regard.
Quick fact check. Firstly, 81 plus 122 is 203. And secondly, I think Insider originally said this was going to be $200 million. In fact, it's more like 200 million pounds, which is something like 260 or 70 million.
Okay, right, you are.
Let's not give them too much credit.
Okay, yeah. Sort yourselves out, Business Insider.
Yeah, they were pretty much on the money. I shouldn't criticize them, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we've opened talking about price, and some people have said, or suggested at least, that this is an expensive asking price for a business considering its revenues. So, Connor, let's bring you in to talk a little bit about what you make of the price and also sort of the rationale for Entain and why they've done this deal.
Yes, because it's always interesting to hear me do maths live on camera, isn't it? I know that's everyone's favourite segment. So, yeah, precisely. A few people have mentioned that the price seems a little bit high. I had one commentator on Twitter said rather emphatically, excited to see the trading margin remain exactly the same, 200 million well spent, which is a bit of a negative view. He added, FYI to US sports betting operations, spending 200 million on trading technology will not help trading margins if the people on the tools still have no idea what they are doing. Not sure exactly what he's referring to there. I don't know what the trading officers look like at BetMGM or any other US bookies. But obviously, as it's a bit more of a nascent market over there than it is here in the UK, we can imagine that the trading teams don't have precisely the same experience as they have here. Anyway,
Was this guy a bettor or an investor, or was he somebody that works in the industry?
his tag on Twitter, his handle is Sprotsbetter. So I think he's a bettor with poor spelling, but that's fine. So anyway, Entain said the acquisition will deliver margin enhancement over the long term, and I think that's the key thing to consider here. Obviously, I think the price is based on that and based on the benefits that it can bring to Entain, specifically to BetMGM, because it is US focused, and not based on how much revenue that company can generate, not least because it's a B2B company. Entain has brought the solution in-house with a view to using it to integrate into its own tech stack, not to offer it out to other operators as a B2B solution. So the revenue is sort of irrelevant in that respect. But yes, I did have a look at the numbers just to work out how long it's going to take Entain to make back the 200 million investment on this particular product. And I had to do a bit of maths to get there. Had to make a few assumptions and do some kind of broad strokes maths because I was diving into Entain's and MGM's financial reports. And for BetMGM so far, they haven't listed the margin rates across the US. They don't break down the revenue into sports betting and iGaming. So it's all a bit difficult to work out. What we do know is that BetMGM generated net gaming revenue of $1.44 billion in 2022. So we know that for a fact. They don't publish their margins, but you can go to certain regulators like the New York Gaming Commission, State Gaming Commission, and you'll be able to work out the margin for yourself because you can see how much is handled in wages and how much revenue that generates. So I did some maths over the last 6 months and got an average sports betting margin in New York for BetMGM of 7.6%.
I know you said you weren't very good at maths, but it really took you 6 months.
No, it didn't take me 6 months straight. It took me 5 minutes.
Very good.
But thank you for that interjection.
Sorry.
Excellent humor. So basically, the New York margin is about 7.6% over the last 6 months. That's got quite a lot of variance in it. Some months are over 9%, some months are under 6%. It's like 9.5%, 5.5%, 7.97%, 5.9%, 8.1%. So it kind of floats a bit. But I think 7.6% is not a bad assumption. I think 7 or 8% tends to be the prevailing sort of margin. So that suggests, again, it's not divided into iGaming and sports betting, but let's say that was all, when in New York, it is all sports betting revenue. So let's assume that nationally, BetMGM's got all sports betting revenue of 1.44 billion at 7.6% margin. That suggests a handle of about $19 billion in 2022. We're talking broad strokes here. So what would be the difference if they're able to improve that margin by certain amounts? Basically, if they can use Angstrom Sports to get that 7.6% margin to a 10% margin, that would have delivered an extra $500 million in revenue last year. You know, if they could get to the 12.9% margin that Entain has on online sports betting globally, then US operations would deliver an extra $1 billion every year. So basically, every 0.1% that they can improve, well, 0.1 percentage point that they can improve their margin by will deliver an extra sort of $19-20 million annually. So every full percentage point they can add on is going to add nearly $200 million to Entain, to BetMGM's bottom line. So all this to say, essentially, that the value of this acquisition, if you have scale like Entain has, the value lies in the fact that you can use tech like this to make very small improvements at the margin level, which will translate into quite massive impacts on the bottom line. So if we talk about £200 million, yes, it's a lot of money, but how much would Entain actually have to improve that margin by in order to make that money back very quickly? Well, actually, not very much. So these incremental differences can add up to a massive impact for the business. So that's my take.
Awesome, fantastic research, Connor. Thank you. Beautifully presented as well, I must say. And you're right as well, because obviously these, they're part of the reason they've bought the company is because it specializes in sort of same game parlay trading software, and that's, as we know, the sort of highest margin bets that you can place on a US sportsbook at the moment. They're the ones that operators want to push on their consumers. And I want to bring in our friends at Islers and Krychek Gaming here, who have put out a newsletter on this earlier today, and they've said that parlays regularly account for between 55 and 60% of revenues in states that report parlay mix. So that's the sort of mix we're looking at here. And they said, in an ideal world, books want to price everything on site, whether it be player props, live lines, pre-game, all from a single source. So basically any of those bets can then be combined into a same game parlay, which obviously isn't as easy if you're taking data and maths and everything else from a variety of different sources. So that might explain, more rationale behind the purchase, really. And I know we said it was expensive, but they point out that PointsBet bought Banach, the Irish trading company, which did a similar job, is focused on pricing and trading technologies for 2 years ago, and that cost them $43 million. And obviously, more recently, we've seen Fanatics buy PointsBet for $225 million. And a major part of that deal was because they could gain access to that Banach trading technology. So Entain aren't the only big operator in US sports betting that is on the lookout for these companies. And I guess people will be looking around in the market wondering who else there is to acquire in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, again, one of the things that we mustn't forget when it comes to acquisitions like these. The value is not only bringing that technology in-house, you're also depriving the rest of the market of that technology. And so if you think it's a USP or a value driver, then, you get to
stop your rivals from getting it.
Stop the rivals from getting it. Yeah. And just on that note about rivals and what you mentioned about same game parlays, I think it's fairly well established that FanDuel, as the market leader in sports betting nationally in the US, is has been spearheading this accumulator same game parlay strategy for a couple of years now. And they were kind of first out with that kind of product offering, and that's obviously had a massive impact on their business. And that is probably the reason that they can quite realistically target a 12% margin on sportsbook compared to BetMGM's, we're estimating, say, 7 or 8%.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
I was just going to say, you can scan the QR code in the top left corner if our viewers want to read all the details of this story. But yeah. I think one really interesting element we've maybe missed out on so far is, again, this dynamic between Entain and MGM Resorts. They're obviously joint venture partners in BetMGM, which is the US sports betting brand of both companies. And, something has to give in that relationship eventually. And I think we're seeing both companies acquire things that will basically give them a better standing in those negotiations, right? Because as we know, BetMGM, the technology primarily at the moment is with Entain. So if MGM wanted to keep that brand, they would either have to buy that off of Entain at a premium, and presumably Angstrom along with that now, Whereas we've also seen MGM kind of hedging its bets a little bit in case it needs to go its own way in the future by buying Leo Vegas, which has its own proprietary technology in the casino side of things. So it's like any news that happens between these two companies, there are going to be after effects for that joint venture and how it eventually gets decided. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a consideration there in the background. There's always some, we get this impression that there's some kind of underlying impact in terms of how that relationship works. I know it's been discussed at length over the past few years about how.
And we've seen MGM come in to try and buy Entain, haven't we? And that was rejected. And I think part of Entain's thinking since then has been, we're going to go heavy on M&A and we're going to get even bigger so that companies can't come in and buy us. We want to be the buying company. And I think you've spent a bit of time this morning thinking about Entain's wider M&A strategy as well, Connor, and sort of where this Angstrom purchase fits in with that.
Yeah, I think it shows the kind of breadth of Entain's perspective when it comes to assessing companies for acquisition. I think it was only a few weeks ago we were on here discussing the acquisition of STS in Poland, and how that fits in with Entain's local hero strategy of kind of buying up these local hero brands, like STS in Poland, like Bet City in the Netherlands. And kind of, you're picking up a business with an established customer base and established revenues and all the rest of it that Entain can then bolster and support and strengthen and continue to grow those brands. I think on the other side of Entain's acquisition strategy, you have deals like the one we're discussing today, which is a deal that improves Entain's core technology stack, improves its ability to continue developing its own products. And I think that both sides of that strategy are really important for Entain. It is in some sense it's a demonstration of a build and buy strategy. It's bought Angstrom, but the point is to use that to build its own technology stack.
Because if you think you can go into a country and buy a local hero that's already number one in the market, and then you can add these superior trading tools and everything else when the tech integration is underway, they're just going to go from strength to strength, really, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as another point of comparison, that you have the Angstrom deal on the technology side, the Bet City and STS deals on the local hero brand buying side, and then somewhere in the middle you've got another recent Entain acquisition, which was 365 Scores, and I think that acquisition spoke to both of those strategies in a way, because obviously they're getting a great deal of data and analytics through that acquisition, which they can use to bolster their existing products and so on, but they've also bought an existing engaged customer base, which, they're not exactly sports betting customers, but there's going to be a high incidence of crossover of people who can be cross-sold into sports betting. So they've bought, both the brand, which is a hero brand in some sense to sports fans, they've bought that user base, and they've also got the technological and data impact of having access to all that. So that's sort of a deal that was somewhere in the middle, but I think it just illustrates quite nicely the breadth of Entain's purview when it comes to acquiring businesses. Pretty interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. All about scale at the end of the day. And I think Entain are somewhat related to our second major story this week as well. Or should I say GVC, as they were known then. I'm sure you're probably all aware of this by now if you're tuning in. But 888 has basically had to terminate its discussions with FS Gaming, which was an investment vehicle consisting of some pretty big executives that used to run GVC Holdings before it transformed into Entain. One of them was Kenny Alexander, who was the old CEO of GVC. And as it turns out, these discussions between FS Gaming and 888 were designed to basically put Kenny Alexander back in a chief executive position at 888, which, as we know, is without sort of permanent leadership at the moment. We had an inkling that would be happening already, didn't we, Connor? Because the news came earlier this month that they'd built up kind of 6.6% shareholding and were gaining momentum in the business. But the reason it's transpired so dramatically is because 888 has basically had to cut those discussions off entirely, because really it was concerned that it would have its license to operate in the UK revoked. Do you want to explain a little bit as to how that scenario unfolded and why that was a major concern for 888?
Yes, it would be my pleasure, and this is a topic that I know intimately. So what happened was, as I understand it, there's a rule in UK gambling regulations that if a change of corporate control takes place within a licensed gambling business, the UKGC, the Gambling Commission, must approve any changes. Basically, they must approve that change in corporate control. So it has to have oversight, basically, of who's running these businesses, as you would expect.
Yeah. Why would they have had an issue with Kenny and company taking over? What's the problem there?
Well, as we know, not long ago, HMRC, the UK's tax agency, revealed that it had initiated an investigation into the then called GVC Holdings activities in Turkey. And there were some pretty serious suggestions of what might come out of that story, including breaches of the Bribery Act. So that is kind of high-level criminal activity, it sounds like. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just saying bribery doesn't sound good. And Entain has already said that it's expecting a significant financial penalty, and I think analysts have estimated that to be in the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a bit of concern there over the past behaviours of the likes of Kenny Alexander and some of these other executives who were at GVC Holdings at that time. Yeah. Anyway, so that's ongoing. And
that's why I think it was of particular interest to the Gambling Commission, because they, behind the scenes, have been in discussions with HMRC and are obviously following this historical case closely. Reading between the lines, potentially they know more than we do in terms of who's actually caught up in this case, and whether that might have had an impact on their role in sanctioning this change in corporate control. It looks like 888 basically couldn't afford to take the risk by letting those guys build up more than 10% shareholding. I think they were working along with another investment vehicle to try and build that up. And the Gambling Commission basically warned them and said, we have serious concerns here. And in opening the book publicly, like they have, 888 went back to FS Gaming and Kenny and his old colleagues and basically said, we need guarantees from you, because the Gambling Commission's worried about this. And those guarantees weren't forthcoming. Unfortunately for 888, the damage was sort of already done to a degree by that point, because the Gambling Commission had determined that they needed to open a new license review into the company. And the other funny part of this is obviously the reaction of investors, because Kenny, it was a different industry back then. And for all his faults, if there are any, he was an incredibly canny operator, and basically GVC went from strength to strength under his leadership, and investors in 888 were kind of rubbing their hands together thinking, oh yes, this could be us. This is the guy to get William Hill back in the top tier in the UK. And the share price sort of soared accordingly, didn't it, when that investment was first built up? But then by announcing that actually they've had to cancel these talks over regulatory concerns, the share price went right back down again by, I think, about 23% on the news. And we've got a funny tweet here from Alan Bowden, who we like to quote fairly regularly on the podcast, who says the company could or maybe would have lost its UK license if he'd become the CEO, and the market didn't like that. Not happening. The gambling stock market is one of the most consistently disconnected from reality markets that exists, maybe second only to US politics on Betfair. But even with that tweet, I think you can see there from the share price graph just how drastic a change this news had on the 888 stock.
Yeah, let me point out, Jake, that things have bounced back quite significantly since then. So that was at 82 pence a share that Alan showed it. It's now at 100 pence a share. And before, I mean, even before Kenny was mentioned, and before this, this kind of proposition started coming into the public eye, so shares were 70 pence before Kenny was, before FS Gaming stormed onto the scene, and they quickly went up all the way to 123 pence. So that's like nearly 100% increase in the space of 10 days. I mean, when Alan talks about disconnected from reality, yeah, these shares are wild. But they're now at just over 100 pence, so still nearly 50% ahead of where they were at the beginning of June before this shareholding was announced. So I will say that I think obviously the market's really struggling to price this one. But yes, just thought I would mention that it has bounced back a bit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the executive chair of 888, Lord Mendelssohn, who's kind of, having to steer the ship, he tried to put a bright outlook on this by suggesting that they're fairly close to appointing a new CEO. Although, you have to doubt that slightly if they were sort of hanging their hat on Kenny coming back in. But if and when that person is appointed, you would hope that can bring some security to the company and a bit of stability as well.
Yeah, I think we can't obviously see the internal goings on. Perhaps, perhaps Triple Eight's board knew about FS Gaming and the intentions there long before any of us did. You have to assume that they probably did. And they may have been waiting to see what transpired there. But yes, I'm sure they had a plan B in place. I think we're all interested to see who eventually does step into this role. Is it going to be someone like Kenny, who used to run a big firm and now has, decided to do something else? Or is it going to be someone outside the industry, someone totally new?
Maybe it's Nico, and he's actually at the job interview today. Last week was first stage, today's second stage.
Yeah, could well be. It could well be.
I think, I'd fear for them if that was the case. I think he won't thank me for that. Right, moving from one big UK operator to another. Again, unfortunately, in the news for negative reasons this week, and that is Betfred, who have been hit with a just over £3 million regulatory settlement from the Gambling Commission for anti-money laundering and social responsibility failings as it continues its clampdown. Connor, you wrote this story. Do you want to highlight some of the key talking points in it for our viewers today?
Yes, I'm quite happy to throw out a few big shocking figures, just like the Gambling Commission likes to. So it was based on activities between January 2021, December 2022, so about a 2-year period. And the Gambling Commission found insufficient controls in place to protect new customers, monitor high velocity spend and duration of play. So there wasn't enough safer gambling interaction, responsible gambling interaction with big spenders. And there were also AML failures and the brand failing to track. Oh, it seems like, sorry, I think I've got a bit of technical. Apologies if I'm going slow. I'll keep going. You just stop me if.
You sound okay to me, mate.
Okay. So yes, AML. There was some poor record keeping. several customers losing tens of thousands without having any kind of enhanced affordability checks or AML checks taking place. So just to give you a few of those examples, there was a customer who staked more than £500,000 in 2 months, and Betfred failed to carry out any safer gambling interactions with that customer. Another customer lost £61,000 in 4 months. One lost £72,000 in 9 months. One lost £120,000 over 11 months, and they all took place without enhanced AML checks, which is really not good. But yes, so it's nothing new, really.
Yeah.
It's nothing new. There's loads of
there is one new element to the story you could argue, and that's the £500,000 that you're talking about that was allowed to be staked in 2 months. And this was a really interesting element for me because, unlike a lot of historical cases we've seen where bettors are spending way beyond their means and are having to, we've seen the newspaper headlines, steal from their employers, that sort of thing, to fund these types of habits. This was actually a professional gambler who was a poker player. And it's raised some interesting debate, particularly on Twitter amongst the betting community, about because this was Betfred's argument back at the regulator, was that they didn't think the customer was at harm because they were a winning customer. And I think they were actually up by about 8,500 at this point. But I guess the fact remains, it's not the job of safer gambling or compliance teams to try and determine which customers are profitable and which ones are losers. Like, the whole point of these enhanced safer gambling measures is that they set off triggers, right, at any rates, and whether you're winning or whether you're losing, staking, like you say, £500,000 in 2 months should be a red flag, regardless of kind of personal wealth, you would argue. And that was one of the points some people made on Twitter, was that, or I think it was in the commission's ruling, that this was close to the individual's net worth. And if that is the case, then that is a responsible gambling trigger, regardless of whether they're profitable or not anyway, because it implies that they're spending, every penny they have to a degree.
Yeah, so the the criticism from the Gambling Commission was that Betfred made assumptions that customers were not at risk because they were winning customers, which is not really how, as you say, not really how the system's supposed to work. It should be thresholds that are triggered by certain levels of spend. On the other hand, there was some commentary from Melanie Ellis at Northridge Law, who often offers up some really interesting insight and analysis into these cases on LinkedIn. And Melanie said, I'm sure the Gambling Commission appreciates that a person's total gambling stakes will typically be much higher than their total outlay, particularly in a game like poker. Well, sounds obvious when you put it like that, Melanie. So it's not entirely clear why the relationship between this customer's stakes and their net worth was a relevant consideration here, particularly given there was presumably decent evidence that they were a professional poker player. So I think that's a fair criticism, that actually, of course, if you bet you might bet £1,000 in a poker game and come away £10 up or £10 down. And just because you've staked £1,000 doesn't mean that you were, in danger of losing it all. But the harshest criticism that came from Melanie, I think, was this. She said the Gambling Commission has not provided any helpful guidance in this statement, merely stating that the player should have been subject of safer gambling considerations. If the Gambling Commission wants to improve operator practices, it needs to set out what exactly Betfred should have done differently in this scenario. And I think that's a fair criticism, because
otherwise you just get speculation on social networks and people basically guessing about what's gone on.
Yeah, and also it's hard to find the consistency between the levels of spend that we're talking about and the penalties that are issued as a result of that. You know, I think that the Gambling Commission is a little bit cagey on that at times, that the information's not always super clear. And obviously, we know every time they put out one of these press releases on the latest settlement or fine or whatever it might be, they're always remindful to other operators that, guys, you need to pay attention to this. Look what we're doing to people if they don't comply with regulations. So, and I think Melanie makes a fair point there. It's like, if you want to make an example of people that other operators can follow, then some more specific, more direct, actionable advice might be useful.
Yeah. And she, like you say, she's worth a connect on LinkedIn. I think if you want to follow her on with her regulatory commentary, she does some stuff on marketing as well, doesn't she? When the ASA stamps down rulings in our sector. So, you follow our advice or don't. I think we're running on 40 minutes now, Connor. Do you want to call it there, or do you want to do the loot box story quickly?
Well, we can say quickly, can't we? The UK Interactive Entertainment, which is a trade association in the video gaming industry, has introduced a new set of guidelines around loot boxes, which obviously is fantastically interesting to you and me. We're always playing on our Nintendos, aren't we, Jake? Buying loot boxes and the like. So this is obviously a thrilling story for us.
I mean, you say that. I mean, not me anymore, but probably 10 years ago, I was buying loot boxes left, right, and centre on the FIFA video game, because you basically get player packs and it's like top trumps, right? And you build your squad with players you're randomly assigned out of these packs. And like, for me, that was a more addictive technology than gambling was even. I wasn't addicted myself, but I could very easily see why people could get swept along in it, because it's that whole thing of like virtual currency, right? It doesn't really feel like you're spending real money, and you're not getting anything real in return for it either. So it's kind of separate almost to what's in your bank account or whatever.
That's it. That's the problem, and that's part of what the discussion around this has been, as this loot boxes gambling discussion has been going on for so long now. And I think if you remove the kind of unlicensed, these skin betting exchange things where actually some of these items can be exchanged for real money, I think my fundamental view on it was that it's not really gambling, because you can't win anything of any value. So you've got no chance of getting your money back. You're buying something.
That makes it worse, though, surely, not better.
Well, no, but it makes it not gambling. That's the thing.
Yeah, I guess gambling is the random.
If you can't win back more money than what you're staking, then it's not gambling. It's buying a mystery product. Which, I mean, you can do the same thing with holidays. You can book holidays blind, and you get a discount because you're not choosing your hotel, and they reveal to you on the last day which hotel you're going to. You can't call that gambling just because there's an uncertainty around the product. Anyway, that's another discussion. Point is, we've got 11 new principles now, which are designed quite specifically to protect under 18s, but also to protect consumers more generally. So if I can give you a very quick rundown, and then I think we'll go and have some lunch or a pina colada. Basically, they want to make available technical controls to restrict under 18s from buying loot boxes, drive awareness and uptake of those controls, form an expert panel on age assurance in the games industry, whatever that means, disclose the presence of loot boxes in games prior to downloading them, so parents can find out if they've got loot boxes in before their children have access. They will need to give clear probability disclosures, which is in line with sort of declaring your RTP on a slot game. Design and present loot boxes in a way that's easily understandable and promotes fair and responsible play. Continue to tackle the unauthorized external sale of items acquired from loot boxes for real money, so what I was referring to before. Commit to lenient refund policies for when little Johnny gets hold of mummy's phone and uses her credit card details without her knowledge. Advanced protections for all players by engaging with third-party organisations and work with the government. So basically, we'll probably see a few changes coming up pretty soon in terms of, basically, I think the fundamental thing here is transparency around what you're actually buying when you buy a loot box. They're going to have to disclose a bit more information. They're going to have to make it easier for parents to prevent their children from accessing loot boxes. And so they're being treated a little bit more carefully and a bit more seriously than they would otherwise. Still not regulated as gambling, because they're not, but getting a bit stricter on
them. And I think
so
games developers have kind of felt the tide turning in this direction for a little while now, really. I remember just after I stopped playing video games, I think FIFA did a thing where, like, the cheapest loot box you could buy, they would let you preview it so you could see the contents of it, and then you could decide whether it was worth purchasing. But obviously the really expensive ones were still completely random. You didn't know what you were going to get. So they've kind of been doing things here and there. And I think it's worth pointing out as well, the UK is not the only country to clamp down on this. I think there's a lot stricter laws that have come into force in Belgium and Holland, in the Netherlands, and other places in Europe.
I think Spain as well has been pretty strict on them.
Yeah. But I think you're right in that the sort of key here is the protection of under 18s and not being able to buy them without the consent of a parent or guardian. I think is a really good start for this framework. One to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I also think it's a move back in the right direction for the video game companies. It's not a topic I engage with particularly because I don't play video games anymore because I'm an adult, but I used to play them a lot. And it used to be that you spent 40 quid on the latest title, and then that was it. And you got you get 40, as much
40 quid a year, and that was all the investment.
And now it's like, everything's pay to play. It's all about these microtransactions, and I do think it's a little bit unfair to your customer base to be trying to rinse them like that. I think it's a little bit out of order, and I think a lot of video gamers probably feel the same way. And video games have been charging towards that new business model now for a long time of little buy this little extra here and there, and before you know it, you might have spent hundreds of pounds on a single game or more.
Yeah, pay to win. They're calling it on the Reddit forums, I think, Connor. But to such a degree, obviously, that the developers are actually not even charging for their games anymore. If you think about Call of Duty and stuff, like we said, 50 quid for a game for a year, you were sorted. Now they've foregone that purchase price because they know they can charge hundreds, thousands of pounds per user to basically buy progress throughout the game. And that does need addressing, I think, because it very easily spirals out of control.
Yes. Bring back chess.
Chess. Yeah, exactly. A nice harmless game for everyone.
Very sophisticated.
Yes. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of our roundup for this week. Thank you for sticking with us, and thank you to everyone that's commented in the chat, Elif there, and Patrick and Batula, who we didn't get a chance to say hello to earlier.
And Sandy and Alvaro.
Yes, exactly, and those guys. It wouldn't be the same without you, so thanks for joining us every week. I've got one more thing to flag before we do say goodbye, and that is that you still have 2 weeks left to nominate your friends and your colleagues for iGaming Idol, the prestigious award show that we run towards the end of each year. So don't hesitate, scan the QR code, get your nominations in. Connor, you need to nominate me, I think. You haven't done that yet. But yeah,
I'll nominate you to the Hall of Fame. Yes, there's lots of categories that you can nominate colleagues for pretty much every function within a business. So if you've got a colleague you want to celebrate, absolutely follow that QR code, go and nominate them. It's one of the of course, I would say, and I agree, it's the premier best award show in the industry anywhere. We have a super rigorous process. And so it's really something to be celebrated, getting nominated for one of these awards and getting on the shortlist. So yes, I would encourage everyone to go and do that.
Yep. And most importantly, it's an excuse to dress up, Connor. You forgot that.
Yes, well, you know me and tuxedos, Jake. Once or twice a year I become like a pint-sized James Bond for the evening. So something to look forward to there in November.
Exactly. Thank you, obviously, also to our sponsors today, Playson Interactive and Hub 88. And thank you mostly to you, Connor, for joining me once again. I'll see you at the same time next week.
Yes, the pleasure has been all mine. Thanks,
Cheers.
Jake.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for watching.